Barack Obama said he wanted an Asia pivot. Well, here goes. Fox News reporting that China has set up a missile launch base on Woody Island. That's part of an archipelago disputed with Taiwan and Vietnam. The story breaking just as the U.S. president was wrapping up a summit of Southeast Asian nations to strengthen ties after the recent Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal. Now, the buildup, seen by many as payback after a U.S. Navy destroyer recently sailed past disputed South China Sea islands, a warning to Beijing to stop building artificial islands to grab resource-rich waters. Is the region now facing a potential missile crisis? How will this shape policy not only among Washington's traditional allies in the region, but countries like Vietnam? Does the rivalry with China make Hanoi Washington's new best friend on this? Once again, the U.S. has to look at the broader picture, as a war-weary nation after Afghanistan and Iraq is once again being called upon, this time in the Pacific. Today in the France 24 debate, a China missile crisis, and with us from Washington, Yoon Soon, Senior Associate with the East Asia Program at the Stimson Center. Many thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
From Singapore, risk consultant Nguyen Phuong Lin, many thanks for staying up late to join us.
Certainly. Thank you for having me here.
Antoine Bondaz, he's a fellow at the Asia Center here in Paris. Thank you for joining us again. And Alice Ekman, head of the China research at the French Institute of International Relations, IFRI. Nice to see you again.
Thank you.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, our hashtag F24debate. Beijing has all but confirmed the story. They haven't denied it, and they've just stated that it is justified and reasonable to deploy, quote, defensive facilities on China's own territory. More with Mark Thompson.
A disputed island, and now also a militarized one. Satellite images appear to show 8 surface-to-air missile launchers being installed on Woody Island by the Chinese military between February 3rd and February 14th. Reports confirmed by both US officials and Taiwan, which also claims the island. China didn't confirm or deny the deployments, but said it was an attempt by the Western media to create a story.
The limited and necessary self-defense facilities that China has built on the islands and reefs stationed by Chinese personnel is consistent to self-preservation and self-protection that China is entitled to under international law.
The presence of missiles would increase tensions in an already heated dispute over territory in the South China Sea. Beijing has been building artificial islands in a region of reefs and rocks known as the Spratly Islands, just over 200 miles off the Philippine coastline, on which China is also building large airstrips. China claims the territory, referring to documents dating back to the early 20th century known as the 9 Dash Maps, something the Philippines disputes, citing UN conventions. It's taken China to the Court of Arbitration at The Hague, although China has so far refused to attend hearings, arguing the court doesn't have jurisdiction. At a summit of Southeast Asian nations this week, US President Barack Obama reaffirmed his commitment to backing longtime ally the Philippines. The US has previously sent warships and conducted operations and exercises in the area, something China calls a threat to peace and stability in the region.
Let's begin with you, Yoon Soon, in Washington. Are you surprised by this latest development on Woody Island?
Well, we cannot say that we're totally surprised because starting from last year, when we were having major problems with the establishment or the build-up of the artificial islands, people were concerned about what kind of weapon system that the Chinese would be deploying to these areas. And back then, the Chinese response to our questions was, we're going to deploy what we see as necessary to deploy. And then, of course, last October, when Xi Jinping visited Washington, D.C. and pledged to the non-militarization of the South China Sea, people were a little bit reassured, but questions still remain as for what China would eventually do. So the conversation or the sense from China, especially from Beijing, about some sort of weapon deployment in that area has been in the air.
Has been in the air, and we, of course, saw those that that naval ship in the Spratlys that went through. What do you make of the sequence of events since Xi Jinping visited Washington?
The timing is certainly curious, right? We saw that the U.S. conducted the freedom of navigation operations in both Spratly and Paracel in the past few months. Then we see that China was complaining about these operations. Then most recently, we saw that the WIBAUX also had an innocent passage within the 12 nautical miles of the Triton Island, which was claimed by both China and Vietnam. And now we have the deployment of the Chinese rocket launch pad. So I would say that I agree with you. The timing is certainly interesting, to say the least, and it's very difficult for us now to see that as a sequencing leading up to China's decision to eventually deploy these weapon systems.
Antoine Bondaz, was this bound to happen after the U.S. Ran that frigate through, that battleship through?
Basically, the U.S. have been conducting this kind of operation, freedom of navigation operation, for the last 10 years. So there is nothing new. And China has always complained about them. What's very interesting, actually, with the timing today is that the information has been released during the U.S. ASEAN summit in Sunny Island. So there is like two symbolic events. First, to release it on the second morning, while the U.S. and the ASEAN leaders are negotiating what could be the role of the U.S.
So you're suggesting that U.S. intelligence knew about this beforehand?
Actually, I don't believe that the Taiwanese satellites are better than the U.S. satellites when the U.S. Army is looking with scrutiny with what's happening in the South China Sea. So clearly the U.S. knew before the summit. What's interesting is the timing of the release of the information. Second, it could...
So who released it? Let's get this straight, because it was Fox News that first reported it.
It seemed that it was first the Taiwanese press and then the U.S. press. So it's still not very clear, but it was officially actually in the Taiwanese press that they have been the first to release the information. So this is very interesting in terms of timing. And clearly they knew it before, but they have decided to release the information during the US ASEAN summit. Is it surprising from China to do so? Not really, because as soon as November, China actually has been deploying some G-11 aircraft fighter on the island. So it's kind of coherent in their strategy to deploy now like surface to air missiles in order to defend their installation, their planes. So there is nothing actually very surprising. What's very surprising most is the question of the timing.
In Nguyen Phuong Linh, should we be worried?
Well, before answer your question, I also would like to remind you about the timing you mentioned. It's very interesting timing. Today is also anniversary 37 years of Vietnam-China war border. So it's been like, if you follow Vietnamese communities online, there's a huge discussion about the timing of today. Why is China send the missiles to South China Sea today on the anniversary date? I don't think it's more about Vietnam, China. It's more about China and U.S. relation rather than China and Vietnam. And should we worry about that? So far, I think this movement is not the biggest one compared to the few other things that China already did in South China Sea. So in my opinion, I don't think there will be anything significant changes in the relation, in particular Vietnam-China or Vietnam-US.
Won't be any particular changes, you say. However, we did see, for the first time this Wednesday, authorities in Hanoi allow a pre-planned commemoration of that 1979 war between China and Vietnam. There's a sense that the stakes are rising between Vietnam and China.
Well, so far, Vietnam's survival strategies has been offered like benefits and economics and political opportunities to as many states as possible. So in order to give them some interest to preserve Vietnam's independence and freedom from any other states. So yeah, you're right. That's the Vietnam authorities allow the ceremonies today in Hanoi is kind of like rare. But again, I think when the most international attention is focused on the South China Sea dispute, the perception in Hanoi is just how to maintain its independence.
All right.
So fear of being like co-opted in any anti-China agenda. So I don't think that's anything significant good happen.
Ali Zachman, let's look at some of the stakes here. There was the recent landing of the Chinese planes on artificial islands they had built. Those have been condemned by the U.S. and their allies. At stake is power, prestige, and also natural resources in that South China Sea.
Yeah, well, I fully agree with what's just been said. The escalation of tension in the South China Sea has more to do with China-U.S. reinforcement of competition than between China and Vietnam, historical tension.
If we look at that map, for instance, there, your thoughts on is it about prestige, or is it about those areas with the lines are the areas where there may be oil?
Well, you see, you have several, I think, aspects to consider. First of all, you see that Paracel Island is closer to China than Spratly Island, right? All this is disputed territory, right? South China Sea. But Paracel Island, there is also a point of analysis within China and outside China to say that this development that we are witnessing today, the building up, the just recent missile development that we're just witnessing, is also really to protect Hainan Island, because it's developing as a very important Navy base for the PLA in China. So it's one aspect of it. Another aspect is, of course, resources. It's a sea-rich area here, and also another aspect is freedom of navigation. I'm not sure China would to contest freedom of navigation, but it wants to be able to manage this area and to show to the U.S. that surveillance, that actions, that partnership that exists in the region is not as welcome as it used to be before. So we really see, I think, a reinforcement of U.S.-China tension in the region at various levels. And China is focusing, is developing its ambition in the region following two tracks. One is, we would say, tougher and clear-cut position regarding territorial claims in the East China Sea and South China Sea. And another track is the development of economic diplomacy towards Southeast Asia, not only towards Southeast Asia, but it's included in...
Yeah, Vietnam China is Vietnam's #1 trading partner.
Exactly, via its so-called One Belt, One Road strategy. So it's also about reinforcing economic partnership in the region, at the same time be very clear, very proactive when it's come to territorial disputes.
All right, so to try to decrypt what's happening here, there's a sense that people, as Alice was saying, are sort of laying their, putting their stakes in for the future. The nationalist president-elect of Taiwan, which also has a claim on Woody Island, Tsai Ing-wen, she played it, you'll hear, a bit low-key in her reaction.
I think the South China Sea is a region that everyone pays close attention to, especially on issues relating to disputes over sovereignty. It's a relatively tense situation, so we call on all sides to stick to the principle of resolving the dispute over the South China Sea in a peaceful manner. Self-restraint is most important.
When she was elected, Yoon Sun, she was billed to us here in the West as a firebrand nationalist. Those aren't firebrand words, though.
No, those are not. But here's a problem. So Taiwan is even a bigger, more contentious problem between the United States and China. And like you pointed out, with the election of Tsai Ing-wen, who is the DPP president, with the record of DPP's previous president pursuing a pro-independence course, U.S.-China relationship was in a lot of problems during the last DPP presidency. So when she came into the office, the biggest problem for her is how to manage that image and how to manage the issue of their relationship with both the United States and with mainland China at the same time. And that was also the biggest question that both Washington and Beijing had posed to her. How are you going to manage the cross-strait relations and not to damage U.S.-China relationship at the same time? So for her, South China Sea is probably not on her priority list, and the safest strategy for her to pursue is like what she just did, to have a moderate position, to say all the politically correct things, and now to try to play a major role on the issue of South China Sea.
Try to play a major role in the issue of South China Sea, so playing her cards close to her chest up to now. We saw on the other end there also, I wouldn't call it conciliatory, but it was a bit strange to us. The end of last month, we saw the outgoing president of Taiwan, Ma Ying-jeou, make a quick in and out trip to another disputed island, Taiping, and the reaction from Beijing was sort of unfazed. Why is that?
Well, first of all, whether Ma Ying-jeou had a close consultation with Beijing before he took the trip was a mystery to many. So it could be just his personal decision or the decision as he's outgoing as a president of Taiwan to pay a visit to the Taiping Island.
But why would he consult with Beijing before going?
Well, Ma Ying-jeou has been on a relatively good term with Beijing in the past 8 years, and Beijing has appreciated his mainland policy to the extent that they met Chinese President Xi Jinping, met with Ma Ying-jeou in Singapore without basically advance notice to any other countries or any parties involved. So the perception in China is Ma Ying-jeou has been on good terms with China. And for a major move, such as the visit to the Taiping Island, you would assume that some dialogue or consultation should have happened before he went. Well, we don't know whether he actually consulted with Beijing, but the political stunt that he put on by visiting the Taiping Island was quite impressive.
What was the point of that stunt?
Well, for one, as the outgoing president of Taiwan, I believe that he would like to point out that under his 8 years of presidency, Taiwan has maintained its territory in the South China Sea, and Taiwan has made achievements both politically and in terms of security in South China Sea. So there are things that he can claim as his legacy. You might remember that Taiping Island has been under the control of Taiwan basically since the end of World War II. So this is one largest piece of territory or land in the middle of South China Sea that has been consistently under Taiwan's control.
All right, so a free pass on that one from Beijing. But of course, it's not the same as we were seeing with Woody Island today when it came to the relationship between on the one hand, China, and on the other hand, Vietnam. We'll talk about it when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate.